Welcome to the Essence of And, a perspective on creating relationship models for understanding and insights. In the Creating Insights perspective, I talked about how we start with a situation and we use that as a point of focus to help us guide us in developing a set of relevant relationships to help us understand why things they are the way they are and hopefully provide us some insights. And in the causal relationships perspective, I talked about a set of conventions for using definitions of relationships between things to as a basis for creating relationship models. But what I haven't provided to this point is any amount of guidance about how you get from there to actually creating a relationship model that helps us understand and produces insights. And surprisingly enough, you can get there with just two questions. And the question is essentially the same in both directions. It's a question of and we'll walk through it in this manner. I'm a farmer, and I currently have crop-eating insects damaging my crops. So the question is, and what influences this, and what does this influence? Or what influences this, and what does this influence? You ask the same questions over and over again as you begin to build out the relationships. So what being a farmer and having learned things over time, I have learned that if I have insects eating my crops, the typical response is to apply pesticides because I understand that pesticides actually kills crop-eating insects, and therefore what I've created is a goal-seeking structure where I apply pesticides to kill crop-eating insects so they stop killing my crops, eating my crops. Though what I've found out over time is that year after year it seems as though I have to spray more and more to get the same level of control. And I sort of don't quite understand what that is. So I can look at these elements and ask the same two questions over and over again. What does this influence and what influences this? And at this point I'll take crop-eating insects, and I understand that crop-eating insects have insect births, which add to crop-eating insects, and I have an exponential growth structure. So because the pesticides don't kill all of them, some of the remaining ones actually have births and renew the population. So I'm fighting an ongoing battle, though is that the only thing? Well, insects have this nasty habit of figuring out how to become immune to the pesticides that I use so that it creates more insects to damage my crops, and I apply more pesticides, creating more pesticide immunity. And if you walk this loop, you find out that there are no opposite direction or subtraction relationships. So it's another reinforcing structure taking me in a direction that I absolutely don't want to go, making it even more difficult for me to control the crop-eating insects. And I then ask, well, what else does some of these things influence? And you come up with dead ends, but you're looking for loops because we've understood over time that loops tend to have more influence over the behavior of relationship models than direct influences. So in terms of the crop-eating insects, well, I didn't have a crop-eating insect problem before I started to spray and have crop damage. And in searching, I find that there are actually controlling insects that used to eat the crop-eating insects. The difficulty that arises, though, is because the crop-eating insects are damaging my crops, I apply pesticides which kill the controlling insects, which result in more crop-eating insects. So via my own actions, I have created a vicious reinforcing structure where the more I apply pesticides, the more controlling insects I kill, which means there are less of the crop-eating insects eaten by the controlling insects. So I'm moving things in the wrong direction by my own action. And if you look at it, you end up building out a set of relationships. And as I said before, this looks like a meaningful unfolding story because it goes from B1 to R2 to R3 to R4. Though you get there in various and sundry different ways. You might have built B1 and then you might have built this one depending upon which questions you asked and then you might have built this one, and then you might have built this one. It doesn't matter if you start with the situation and you build the relationship model. After you get it built, you then look at it and figure out what way does it make sense to unfold it as a story. It's a lot of trial and learning, and they don't come out insightful on the first pass. Well, at least not usually. Mine seldom ever do. And what you do is you continue to ask yourself these questions, trying to find additional meaningful, relevant relationships. And some of them you put in and then you take out, and some of them you find later. But when you get to a point of not knowing what questions to ask anymore, you take it to somebody that you know and you explain it to them, not with the intent of impressing them with how smart you are, but in the hopes that as you unfold this story to them, they think to ask questions that you didn't think to ask, so that you can continue to evolve the relevant relationships to help you better understand how to deal with the situation. So that someone might talk about, well, rather than applying pesticides to kill the controlling insects, suppose we did something to promote controlling insects so that they could eat more of the crop-eating insects, so I wouldn't have to apply pesticides. And I could create another virtuous reinforcing loop so that I promoted controlling insects that killed the crop-eating insects. Though if I did that, then I would also have to go one step further and say, okay, if I continue to promote controlling insects and they eat all the crop-eating insects, then what are they going to eat? Because they're still likely to be hungry. And you have to just continue to sort of investigate the relationships until you get to a point where you have a comfortable feeling that you have identified the ones that are relevant, though you can never be completely certain that you've identified all of them, but you do your best. So hope you found this interesting, and I'll see you in another perspective shortly. Bye.